I didn't recognize the writing on the envelope, and as I am not overburdened with letters, curiosity quickly stole over me and led me to open the letter. It was a single card, printed on one side, an invitation of some kind. There was no name, but after scanning the text, I understood I had been invited to attend a reunion at the school I had attended many years ago. Now, initially skeptical of accepting the invitation, one singular fact aroused my interest, that the location of the reunion was not to be the main school building, which was home to the vast majority of boys and had housed me for 5 years, but the ancient Briary, which had served as my scholastic home for the first 2 years of my secondary education. The grand building had once been the grammar school's one and only building, an impressive Victorian structure built to educate Catholic boys in the region who were either rich or academically gifted enough to win a coveted place on the school's register. Of the 7 years I spent in secondary education, these first two were by far the most interesting and rewarding, in no small part due to the atmospheric setting of my lessons. Oh, while I did not blossom academically, I found the whole experience of being taught in such a magnificent setting to be thrilling. After overcoming my initial intimidation of the old place, I found that I enjoyed the ambient surroundings and thrived on the history that emanated from the wood and brick. During the autumn months, after trawling the surrounding road for conkers, which had fallen from the overhanging chestnut trees, I would often arrive at the school from the east entrance, which led to the new main school building with its typical comprehensive facade. This would then require me to walk through the tunnel, which was at the head of some steps at the end of the new playground. The tunnel was the connection between the school of today to the one of yesterday. Around 200 feet long, it ended in a series of steps which were seen from a distance, say, from the entrance of a tunnel by the eyes of an 11-year-old boy, looking like giant logs stacked one on top of the other in a seemingly insurmountable pile. Hopefully, the one electric light on the roof of the tunnel in its centre would give a comforting glow. If not, you fix your eyes on the daylight at the end and marched forward. I would hurry through this tunnel, but never run. To run was to give in to the creeping sense of being watched, of being followed. To run was to let your mind snap and admit that you were scared, terrified. Yet it was terror that mingled with excitement, until the moment you emerged at the other side and scaled the steps of the soft earthen path that was shaded by thin trees, and heard the birds singing and felt the air on your face again. Then you might laugh to yourself, and nod to your own cowardice and bravery, acknowledging the gratitude and admiration you felt for being on safe ground again. My young mind often embarked on flights of fancy, and it almost felt as if the old place whispered as I walked alone through its corridors and hallways to class. This was no doubt due to the stories of all boys were told of the butler who hung himself in the loft of the Briary around the turn of the last century. Looking back, I'm certain this tale was an ingenious ruse to discourage boys from roaming the more secluded parts of the school and to keep them in groups, heading straight to whatever class they were meant to be going. At the time, though, I, as well as every other boy, felt a sense of disquiet as we passed the steps leading from the east corridor up to a small locked door, as this was rumoured to lead to the very loft in question. The fact that this door was forever locked only increased its reputation. Yes, the school was decrepit, but it was also awe-inspiring and emanated a sense of importance and grandeur, which impressed me greatly at the time. Having made up my mind to attend the function, I made my way through the well-remembered streets, and my feet seemed to find their own path as my mind recalled the hundreds of identical journeys I had taken to this place. The early October evening suffused the approach to the school with a golden light as the trees, which formed a natural canopy from either side of the road, swung their branches and shed their leaves. As I stopped at the entrance of the grounds, the gate posts reared above me on either side, yet I almost didn't enter. Years of nostalgia created an unrealistic memory of the place. Well, what if the building was just stone and mortar? What if the otherworldly character I perceived as a boy had lessened as my own character matured? I was certain I would be disappointed with my own history, and felt a certain urge to turn up and flee reality, trying to keep my vision of the past. But my curiosity and affection for the old place was stronger than my fear of anticlimax. With an intake of breath, I crossed the threshold and took my steps towards the building itself. I walked slowly, taking in the atmosphere of the grounds. Even the air smelled differently to what I had a few steps back. Although the light was showing from several windows, I could not see or hear any sign of any other guests, so I decided to savor the moment of anticipation and delayed my entrance to the building, instead turning left to take in the playground that I had run in years ago. Well, this delighted me, as I found that, while it was indeed smaller than memory measured, it still maintained its sense of space. I was still filled with a feeling that it was a place I could relax in, a place I had earned after working hard in class. I walked around the yard with its grey tarmac and red brick walls. I recalled the many games I had played here and listened to the enthusiastic shouts of years ago, but was met with silence. My thirst for reminiscing staked. I didn't linger and headed for the school doors. The handles were still the same, golden, weather-beaten, but still retaining their ornate style, offering a reassuring sense of quality in their solidness. As I pulled one of the double doors open, I was greeted with a rush of age and that familiar, unforgettable sense of school. I was inside. There was still no noise to assail my ears. There was no sight or sound of any other guest, and I checked my watch to make sure that I hadn't miscalculated the time. The light in the hallway seemed insufficient, casting a dull orange glow in the deepening dusk. I walked tentatively forward and placed my hand on the old-fashioned radiator. It was warm. I was puzzled. Doors unlocked, lights and heating both on, yet no sign of anyone. I began to wonder if perhaps I'd mistaken the day. I was not a little disquieted. I thought of turning around and leaving. The sudden sense of unease I felt directed all of my thoughts towards the exit. My legs, however, seemed to lead me forward into the dimness of the corridor, past the old art room, and through the double door to the bottom of the east staircase. This led up to the upper floor, where my old first-year classroom was located. It also led up to the Butler's last grisly abode. I was curious to see my old classroom, and plunged forward up the stairs, past the statue of the Virgin Mary, arms outstretched in supplication. Upon opening the doors to the upper corridor, I was immediately faced with the small door to the loft. Cast in shadow, it seemed tiny and insignificant, yet I felt a shudder as I passed it, trying not to increase my pace. To my joy, I found the door to my first-year classroom unlocked. As I surveyed the room, I cast my mind back 30 years to a time when it was full of small, excitable boys, all animated with talk and laughter. I remembered the numerous times we had been sent home in winter as the ancient heating system had given up the ghost. I can't recall ever feeling the cold in the place, possibly a result of so many small bodies gathering heat and generating it. I noticed it now. The classroom was icy. The desks and chairs were now modern, tough metal and plastic, ergonomically designed, a far cry from the creaking wooden antiques in which I sat. There were many a time I would nip the skin of my thighs in a crack in the wooden chairs, or receive a splinter in my hands from the desk lid. Even though my original desk had long gone, I could still not resist taking a seat in the same position I used to sit, and raising my hand, as if to ask a question of the teacher. It was just as I raised my hand that I heard the double doors in the corridor open and close. With a start, I stood, hesitating a moment while my mind played out all the scenarios that could have caused the sound. My logical brain was certain that it might have been the arrival of another guest. I stepped to the door of the classroom and proceeded beyond, readying myself to greet an old friend from my past. There was nobody there. I hurried to the double doors and gazed through the glass of the staircase. There was no sign of anyone. Retracing my steps, I dashed along the corridor to see if anyone had already passed my classroom. There was nothing. My stomach lurched as the overhead light began to flicker. Before I could shout a hello, the light extinguished, and with it my courage. It was as if the atmosphere of the place had infected my senses. Suddenly I was imagining spectres and ghouls to appear from the corridor ahead of me, or for a cold, skeletal hand to grab my shoulder from behind. Oh, lost in a paroxysm of childish fear, I dashed for the staircase, past the small door to the attic, which suddenly resounded with a sound as if heavy knuckles were rapping on its surface from the opposite side. Oh, my feet carried me with a speed I do not know I possessed, down the stairs, back along the ground floor corridor, and out of the main doors. However, as I ran the short distance to the school gates, I found they were closed, a solid padlock fastening the bolt. I did not stop to consider how this could be, when barely 20 minutes earlier they had been standing open, unlocked. In the 30 years since my boyhood, I knew I had lost the ability to scale the school gates and perimeter walls, and thus fled to the only exit I could remember. Through the tunnel to the main school and freedom. The old, worn path to the tunnel seemed more gnarled and weather-beaten than ever, and daylight was clinging to the earth with its fingertips as darkness stole silently over the grounds. Memory enabled me to navigate the path safely until I arrived at the stone steps of the tunnel, where I stopped my tracks. My fear of the unknown back at the school was matched with my fear of the known ahead of me. I was 11 years old again on a dark and lonely morning, faced with a long walk through my childhood nightmare. I steeled myself to push onwards, stumbled down the stairs, and plunged into darkness. I fear I must have been either physically or mentally sick. How else could I explain the sweat which began pouring from my brow, the weakness in my legs, or worst of all, the sounds I heard in my head? Whether real or imagined, I cannot say. My ears were assailed by a deep, long throbbing, which increased to a crescendo of guttural groans, as if the very walls of the tunnel themselves wept with misery. My head dizzy, my legs shaking, I careened through the tunnel, praying that the light at the end would soon wrap me in its safe, warm arms. Suddenly my progress was halted. My journey through the tunnel was a realization of every nightmare I have ever had of being chased. It seemed that no matter how quickly I lifted and planted my feet, however desperately I wanted to progress, I remained virtually motionless, moving barely an inch from every frantic stride I took. I did not, I could not look back. I was as Lot's wife and knew that if I looked back, I would look into the abyss and never return. My physical and mental strength sapping and snapping, I made a last agonized push for the tunnel's exit, forcing myself through with my mind rather than my body. And then I was out. The air around me was cleaner, free of chilling sounds. No, that was not quite true. There was one chilling sound, A sound that chilled me so deeply that it finally made me aware of what I must do. I heard the sound of the wind through a branch. The east entrance of the tunnel, from which I had longed to emerge, had no foliage, only the concrete mass of schoolyard which belonged to the main building. I was back at the entrance of the tunnel, on the same gnarled path with the same trees swaying overhead. Impossible as this seemed, I turned to look back up the tunnel and saw a miniature version of what I was looking at now. The tunnel had kept me at the Briary, prevented me from escape and forced me into understanding. The truth was clear to me now. I would not be allowed to leave this place until I had done what it wanted me to do. I must enter the attic. With a heart as heavy as the atmosphere, I slowly trudged along the dirt path and re-entered the school. The darkness outside melted before the brilliance of the lights in the school corridor, which now blazed. The double doors at the end of the ground floor corridor were open, awaiting me and beckoning me on. I felt none of the fear I had felt when I ran from the building. The certainty of my task had galvanized me into fortitude. I walked with purpose along the corridor and back up the stairs to the door of the attic. As I stood outside of the door, my newfound courage disappeared along with the light, which was silently extinguished to leave the entire building in blackness. What I had previously thought to be the rapping of knuckles upon the door was no longer to be heard, as silence hung heavy in the air. I could barely find the dull sheen of the doorknob as I forced my hand forward and flexed my fingers around the metal. The door opened soundlessly, and I was confronted with an acrid smell. Faced with several stairs which led to a raised platform around head height, I could see dust motes floating in front of me. Obviously, having been disturbed by the opening of the long-closed door, I took my first tentative step and then pushed my thighs onwards to mount the steps, which had been as high as a mountain for the energy that they drained from me. My eyes reached the level of the top rise and my mouth fell open in a silent scream. Imagination could not have created a more gruesome sight than what greeted me in the attic. Swinging from a beam not 20 feet in front of me was the butler. Only it was not the butler, but Daniel Butler. After all these years, I still recognized the boy I had once mercilessly bullied at school, whose life I had made a misery for 2 years. He was obviously dead. The blue skin and sickening angle of his neck testified to this fact. But his eyes remained open, fixed upon me with a look almost of mirth. Oh, how I wish I had not made those final few steps. The course of my life would most surely have taken a more fortuitous turn. As it was, is... I must finish this now. My sentence is to be past and on, and I do not wish my jailers to see me as dishevelled and debased as I feel. I pray my strength holds for the final few moments of my life. As my protestations of innocence fell upon deaf ears, I have no other recourse but to hope this tale finds its way to sympathetic hands, so that at least my name and reputation, if not my physical self, may be redeemed. I still cannot understand nor quantify how the body of evidence against me in the death of Daniel Butler came to be. My fingerprints on the rope, my blood on his shirt. How did these things come to pass? Coupled with my prior acquaintance with the victim and appearance of several witnesses at the trial who testified to Alison. Friendly past, my jurors took less than 1 hour to find me guilty. Now, It is I who will swing from a noose this very morning. I condemn myself to fate's whim. I must go. I can hear them coming for me, led no doubt by that brute, Warden Butler.